Item A is a public participation and review of the potential alignment of access into the Redbird neighborhood during flooding events. And before we break off to that, we have Mr. Cruzy and Mr. Wilcox from Costello here. They're going to give us a little presentation first, and then from that point, we'll break off into the town hall where we'll be able to get up and look at what they have to present and talk amongst ourselves. Thank you all, gentlemen, for being here.
Folks, again, I'm Sam Cruzy, and this is Stephen Wilcox. We're with the firm of Costello Engineers, and we've been engaged to look at some alternatives for getting folks out to the streets west of Bodark during the inundation of Redbird Lane. And as Stephen's setting things up here and so forth, we've just I guess we were initially engaged a couple of months ago to start this work. We prepared a report last week, as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago. We were in your council meeting and so forth, and presented it to staff and so forth. Discussing some initial alternatives. It's kind of funny, when you do an alternative analysis, you initially think with the scope of work, maybe you're looking at 3 or 4 alternatives, but it seems like it always ends up being 8 or 9 when you're through, and that's basically what we've come up on here. We've taken input from from staff and from council, and certainly I know you folks had had a couple of get-togethers and had put together some information that was given to us last time at the meeting, and we've looked at that information also as we've continued to look at alternatives for providing the emergency access for that particular service area out there and your drainage needs. Stephen, why don't you get started if you're ready, buddy?
You run this one?
I'll try.
All right. So, I know you're all familiar with what happened in Redbird and the flooding and whatnot, but I'm going to go through a little bit of the science here so that way y'all understand where we're coming from at the end of the day. We got 2 colors here. We got a dark blue. That is what the inundation of what happened in June from the Brazos River flooding. This is based on high water marks at Country and Shady, and then one at Redbird, right there at that driveway entrance past the church. So that's what that blue is from. The pink that you're seeing is a Brazos River 100-year floodplain elevation. So if the 100-year actually happens, the pink is what you see in inundation. We were about, on average throughout the county, 8 to 9 tenths below the 100 years. What?
Could you stand a little closer to the mic?
Oh yeah. Sorry, I'm sorry.
There you go.
The point being, in the Brazos River event, we were about 8 tenths below the 100-year event, so we didn't quite get to it. Sam, would you on the next slide, please?
Sure.
So what this shows is this is taking the gauge data. There's a USGS gauge at 98 from 2001 to 2016. This red line represents the gauge height that corresponds to Redbird's lowest elevation. And as you can see here, there's about 7 times instances since 2001 that, at least based on the gauge data, that the river has gotten high enough to inundate Redbird. Now, you may have had some other events in between that may have done something, but based on the Brazos River gauge, this is what we've seen. Go to the next slide. So what you're seeing here is a profile of Redbird from Bodark, which is on the far right over there, and this is down past Country on the far left. And we've mapped, or graphed, excuse me, the different flooding elevations from the effective Brazos River FEMA model. And I'm going to say 10-year. What that means is once every year you have a 10% chance of having this elevation reached. And what you can see is a significant low spot in Redbird as below the 10-year event. And that pretty much corresponds with the gauge data that we've been seeing in the frequency. All of this science you're seeing here is basically Redbird is too low as compared to the Brazos River floodplain elevations, which y'all obviously know because y'all have experienced it the last 2 years. So this is kind of some of the technical data that is behind what we've been coming up with. Next slide. So a summary of the issues, obviously it's too low. And the big issue is, so we looked at your house slabs. We know there's a barn that flooded, but we didn't see any homes that would flood in a 100-year event. That is not based on survey data, that is based on LiDAR data, so I can be off a little bit. But the LiDAR data we're using is very accurate. it just doesn't pick up the slabs real well. So it's probably pretty safe to say that all your homes are either above or slightly right at the 100-year event. And the further you go up country and shady from Redbird, the higher y'all get and the more protection you have. So this is an access issue more than it is a home flooding issue. And usually when we're talking about flooding problems, we're talking about home flooding, not so much a road gets cut off because of a flooding issue. So kind of keep that in mind some as we go on. Next slide. So we did an alternatives analysis. Some of these are things that we talked about with staff, some we talked about in-house, and some came from the survey that y'all provided at the last meeting. So we looked at some of those options, and we got pros and cons of each one, and we can discuss that. Next slide there, Sam.
The engineer who did some of that is a little late, but he's on his way. Do you have a hard copy of this PowerPoint?
We provided council with hard copies.
Yeah, all this
CJ
will be,
releases
all
it
this will be
and we'll-
presented on the city website after.
Yeah, I just wanted to let him see it when he comes in.
So this first alternative we looked at, now these are level of magnitude analyses. This is not detailed design that went in and developed these numbers, but Sam is very experienced. I'm pretty experienced. We used our engineering judgment, what we have in the office, to come up with these cost estimates, okay? So they're plus or minus a little bit. But for comparing alternatives, it's a good method to go through without the city needing to spend excessive amounts of engineering fees, so.
They're planning numbers. In
They're
other words,
planning numbers,
surveying
yes.
and things like that obviously hasn't been done, and that'll refine those numbers. When we put together costs at this level, you know, we try to be conservative about it and so forth, because there's so many unknowns at this point, so forth.
You try to be conservative about your numbers?
Certainly we do, before we get more detailed information, yeah.
So Redbird road raising, that's what this first alternative is. And we've looked at two costs. The first one being raise Redbird right where it's at. And the fill that's needed is, from that previous profile, you need 10 to 12 feet of fill to get that above the 100-year. That would extend embankment into Cottonwood Creek, which, based on our experience, has significant wetland issues. And that fill going into Cottonwood Creek would require individual permits, coordination with Corps of Engineers. It's a very expensive and arduous process. The second alternative we looked at, based on one of your resident surveys and suggestions, was shifting the Redbird up onto the hill. That came in about 2.6 million, so it saves you about half the dirt, but now you've encroached additionally into any of the property owners along Redbird, needing to get right away from them. Your trees, you'd have trees issues, you'd have fence issues, you'd have other things. So those are pros and cons to that. And it's about 2.6 million. So you're looking at $2.5 to $3 million to take existing Redbird, raise it up. The other issue you have with either one of those alternatives is access during construction. Because of how tight it is and the constraints, there's not another route for y'all to get out while we're rebuilding the road. So it would be a significant construction, traffic control process that would have to be followed, which translates into cost.
We just
Point
use the
being.
access road that we're out.
So the second option was one that came from the surveys, which was replaced with a bridge. While doable, bridges are extremely expensive. And so we took it from Redbird, or not directly from Redbird, from where the low point is, all the way to Country. And it was about $8 million for a bridge. So, and if that's your only access point, bridges got to be designed for fire trucks, garbage trucks. You can't do just your normal car weight, I guess is what I'm saying. So that's one deal right there. Cottonwood Creek cutoff. This is one that y'all authorized us to look at, and we've looked at it. The issue is, it's those culverts down at the end past Country on Cottonwood Creek. The question was, can we put gates on those and raise that embankment? And you can, but you do not get full protection. So in the last two events you've had it last year and this year, it would have overtopped anyways, flanked you from the south and flooded Redbird. So it wouldn't have provided you the protection, so we don't feel like it's necessarily worth the money.
So would it have provided minimum
It would
any
it would
protection?
provide a little bit of protection, but the 7 events that you saw, it wouldn't stop those.
Okay.
So that's not the only low point. There's also low points south on that property, and the water can flood across that property and then overtop and get into Redbird. So the next one is release flow into Jones Creek. I know that seems like that would release the flow and pull the plug out. But Brazos River flooding is massive compared to Redbird. And so there's two problems with it. The first one being, you could take out the plug, it's not gonna drop, significantly give you any kind of drop at Redbird, so it's still gonna flood. The other issue, which is probably more important, is Fort Bend County Drainage District will not let you do it because it increases downstream flooding along Jones Creek. So they're not gonna let you take it out, so that's not an option.
Is it in the city?
I'm sorry?
Is the dam in the city?
I don't know if it's technically in the city, but Jones Creek is owned by Fort Bend County Drainage District, and they are not gonna ever permit the removal of that.
Well,
Piece of dirt.
the issue is not so much the road as it was that bar can be on the top of the slab of the house. You know,
That plug of dirt has no effect on the flooding at your house. So taking it out is not gonna reduce those elevations at your house. And then the last one is the emergency access road that we've been discussing, and I'll let Sam take it over. He's done most of the analysis on that, so.
What we want to do, folks, is just give you some of the generalities on that right now. When we get through here, what we'd like to do is we got 3 easels set up back there, and we're going to put large-scale drawings and so forth back there. We've got some circles with us back there that if you would put down there, maybe, for example, we show 6 alternatives right now besides the Redbird alternative that we've all mentioned to you previously, the more expensive one. And what we'd like for you to do is go back and look at them, discuss them with us and so forth, and maybe come out with a blue dot, which you think is one that you might be, reasonable, looks reasonable to you, and a green dot, which would be your second choice.
So you're only talking about the emergency exit now, the temporary emergency
Yes,
exit?
that's what we were under contract to do, is to evaluate alternatives for an emergency access road for when Redbird is inundated.
Oh,
Okay. So that's what we plan on doing. We've got those six alternatives identified on the maps back there that you'll be looking at, and also we'll show you what the red alignment would look like. Kinds of things that we looked at when we put these 6 alternatives together for the access road. Again, information that we could find based on property lines and easements and so forth. Information that we've taken from previous. We understanding there's a route or 2 that y'all have used previously for access down there, so we wanted to make sure we included those. And obviously the big thing is right of way and things like that. Where might the city be able to find some folks that, would be willing to work with the right of way that they're going to need to take care of any of these alternatives? And what they would like to do is some sort of right of access agreement that would have you guys covered, as far as any liability issues and maintenance issues on it and so forth, that you seem reasonable your attorney might be that way. And then just work back and forth to come up with agreements. Certainly there can be easements also acquired if that's the way it needs to go with it.
what's the least number of homeowners that would be involved in having to?
You know what, I've got it over there, but I'm guessing as a whole for a particular route to get you from Bodark over to Country Lane, maybe there's 6, something like that on each particular route, 4 to 6 involved. And one thing to keep in mind is when you go back and look at these, there's some flexibility here. There's some places here, for example, right now where we might show that the access road maybe be right on a straddle a property line, for example, so that there would be property off both sides. But it can just as easy go one side or the other. What we try to do is look at where improvements were, where trees were, and things like that, and just try to use some common sense about that. But there's certainly flexibility about how some of those lines can be moved back there.
Okay, but the general consensus is that it would involve 4 to 6 property owners and
Again, I
agreements.
get my notes. It may be one of them might be 8 property owners or something, but somewhere between 4 and 8 property owners for each alternative. As I mentioned, the things that we talked about. One of the things that we've done is, if you recall, the city has put $360,000 in their budget for this next year for a project such as this. And so these 6 alternatives are what we feel like, from what everybody we've heard so far, would be the 6 options to choose from to be able to implement that project. And like I say, if we've got some questions, that's fine. If otherwise, we can go back to the maps and look at them back there.
At what point, I guess, are we gonna discuss, I have the question about Fort Bend County funding. Does that come now or later, or?
I would say that's actually that's a separate issue. I don't know that, we talked about trying to maybe invite Fort Bend County here. They
Can
don't-
you
oh, I'm
speak so
sorry.
they can hear?
Yeah, so I think that's another matter altogether. Obviously, the city doesn't have $3 million to institute the full-blown project. We don't think, obviously, going into this year, Fort Bend County has that money in their budget either, so we're looking at a special bond issue. And so what we discussed it, and we felt like it wasn't fair to bring the commissioner or somebody from the county here with a week's notice to say, we need $3 million or a portion of that to be there. So we felt like, let's deal with the access issue, and then we can start a conversation with the county, but I don't think it's gonna go very far, I'll be very honest with you.
Have you talked to the county at all?
We've had conversations with the county engineer's office.
Have you had conversations with their budget director or with their accountants or?
No, we're meeting with the county treasurer, this week on another matter, but we will discuss this, but looking in their budget, what they propose for the coming fiscal year, there's no inclusion of any money for any project of this kind.
So all that money, since they are the fastest growing county in the United States, is going to Sugar Land and all of that?
I think they would tell you that they're spending an awful lot of that money on 1093, 1463, and 359.
Okay. But nobody knows for sure.
No, I think you can look at the project models for those projects and see that they're expending.
That wasn't a bond issue or anything?
Some of it was bonds, some of it was loan money, but they're spending an awful lot of money, already in this part of the county. I think that's what they would tell you.
Okay. How much, do you know what percentage of it was bond money?
I don't, I can look that up for you.
Yeah. I don't know how that could be another issue because we can't discuss permanent solutions for the people that are here if we can't discuss funding of that.
I understand that, and that's why we didn't feel like it was fair to ask the county to come here and ask them questions about their finances when they don't, when they're not even prepared to have that conversation yet. Does that make sense?
When they're what?
When they're not prepared to have that conversation at this time, so we didn't feel like it was fair to come to them and ask them to make projections of what they might or may not be able to raise in regards to this project.
Okay, well then how can we decide upon permanent
Well,
solutions?
and that's not the purpose, I don't think, of tonight's meeting. I think tonight's meeting is to figure out what's the best emergency access route into and out of the neighborhood. That's been the charge from the council the entire time.
I don't know, but the survey we took of the residents out there, that,
I understand what the survey said, well, sorry.
Right, that's right. The charge from the council was for us to find an emergency access solution. Meantime, so we can have access to y'all's properties in case this happens again. The city financially, we're not we're not really in the position to be able to, as you can see with their recommendations, to come up with the permanent solution of doing Redbird. Redbird is actually a city street, so the county's not gonna take it upon themselves to fund it all. They're gonna have, the city have to put in a big portion of that. So we haven't gone to that point yet. This is more of just in case of another event that we can get to emergency access to you guys quicker. This is the fastest solution. So this is what council has charged for Costello to come up with a fast solution.
okay,
So-
and I
And from
understand
that
that.
point, later on, we will work.
What
with
is
the
later
council.
on, what is your time frame for the permanent
Well,
solution?
like Mr. Snipes said, he'll be meeting with the county engineers coming up in the next couple of weeks, so this can be presented to them, and you can get more of a time frame from them on what their ability is to help us in that solution.
I would think their requirement for presentation, request of funds is a pretty thick package. Is that not the case? I mean, have you ever requested funds at Fort Bend before?
Well, we've worked with them on various bonding proposals before, and
The
I'm
bond
saying.
issue and this is, they're
Well, I
two different
understand, but
animals.
what I'm trying to say is their budget, they're on the same budget that we are. So they're gonna be moving forward. So now's the time to, if we're looking for funding, future funding, now's the time to have that conversation. But we need to get this project, council charged staff and the engineers with getting this project launched, and that's what we're here to discuss tonight. The other thing I would note is that Redbird, while it's been maintained by the city and by the county, it's technically not a public right of way. It's on private property, which means that any improvement the county, the city, whoever does it, is gonna have to come in and hope that folks are either gonna dedicate that right of way, or we're gonna have to procure that as well. That's what blocked us from using FEMA funds for this.
Who lives on Redbird Lane besides one family?
Those properties, every one of those properties runs south. If you look on the Fort Bend County appraisal district, those property lines run south of the actual roadway. and some of them bisect.
Mine doesn't.
Now, yours may not, but
Some of them do.
some of
Some
them.
of them on land on both sides.
Right.
The first two out. I don't think so.
CJ, how long is this project to?
That's-
5 years.
CJ, could I make a comment, please?
Just 1 second.
How long is the road projected to last with before we have to do more construction, improvements, repairs, that kind of thing?
What was your question? I don't know if they heard.
Ms. Kristen,
The temporary access that we're talking about.
We would anticipate that something to be maintained, you know, in other words, over the years and so forth, and when it got to the point to where the crushed stone needed to be maintained, or where we certainly would anticipate you doing. I wouldn't anticipate this going away myself. I mean, I think it's always gonna be there. It might not be what we're calling the permanent solution, but I would think it would be something you'd wanna maintain.
Why, if we're gonna have a permanent solution?
Well, I'm sorry, I misspoke. It is a permanent solution. It gives you the emergency access whenever the roadway is inundated.
So is it just a
That's
new
correct.
road, we can use it anytime?
No, it's to be used whenever they've got a situation where Redbird can't be used.
What about?
And every time a property owner sells a home or their value goes down, there we go again.
I mean, what we'd ask them to design, if we were going to, in one of the, there are a couple models on there that I think might lend themselves to a permanent rerouting or a new road in the future. The city doesn't have the budget this year for that to become a reality. And so I think if you look at the map and you look at the routes, there may be one or two of those that could be turned into a permanent solution with paving, and maybe we abandon Redbird at some point in the future or leave it to whoever owns it. But I think that this year, right now, this is the best solution the city can offer.
Right, you know, and that's great, and that's needed, as long as there is a time frame, and we're not talking 3 years, 5 years down the line with this
But if I,
fix.
yeah, I understand your consternation, but I can't I don't have a crystal ball, and I can't tell you what the finances are gonna look like for the city or the county 2, 3, 5 years out. So I mean, I have a decent idea, but I can't tell you what the ability is to provide the financial solution to this long-term problem.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect you to be able to do that today, but I would expect you to do forecast planning. And I would expect to proceed with, if you've never done it before, which I take it that you haven't, except for bond issues, look at the requirements in the presentation and package when requesting funds from Fort Bend. That is pretty extensive, I understand. And that needs to get going. I mean, what are we waiting on?
Well, I think number one, we were waiting on numbers, and number two.
Numbers?
Well, this report, we now have an idea of what it's gonna cost us, but I don't think that we can say to the county, we expect these monies and give them a ballpark figure. That's a little bit more in-depth work than what these guys have been charged with. We are following the charge we were given.
I thought the charge,
CJ, my question is, has anyone at the county, Fort Bend County, discussed this with their legal department? I mean, what are their responsibilities to the citizens of Fulshear, the ones that live off of Redbird? Are there responsibilities they have? I mean, we pay taxes.
I understand you pay taxes just like everybody else, and I think that they obviously have to provide your local services. What those services are under the Texas Constitution are pretty ill-defined.
and they are.
Much.
What?
From,
Tony has a suggestion, or I'd like to hear what he has to say.
Yeah, I'd like to address Mayor and City Council. I know definitely that you've had your challenges this year. Well aware of how it is sitting in that seat trying to fund everything that needs to be done in the city of Fulshear. So I know that you've done a great job with the budget this year. This issue became an issue really just a couple of years ago. From what I heard from the residents, they, you know, once every 20 years, it was kind of a fun thing. You know, your kids could ride in a boat back and forth and, you know, maybe miss a day of school or something. But in the last couple of years, it's become more of a common thing rather than an occasional thing. And, you know, in visiting with a lot of the residents, you know, they really would like a permanent solution. I actually, one night I couldn't sleep and I came up with a preliminary plan here. I shared that with Costello. It's one of their options that they presented to you tonight. It did help cut some of the costs down. All of the options in infrastructure are pretty expensive, and the city is struggling with, how to fund these things. I know that the city's trying to get a declaratory judgment for some relief on tax issues and financing projects, but that also contributes to raising our ad valorem, or our property taxes. We have, some funding mechanisms that are available to us currently through the 4A and the 4B development corporations. They have, 4A is restricted on the type of projects that can be done through it. 4B has a lot more flexibility. And CJ, you're well aware of this. We've researched in the past other options of instituting a municipal development district, which could cover not only the city limits, but also our ETJ. And we could collect the sales tax, and it wouldn't be a burden on the property taxes. My suggestion would be that council, move forward, as Ms. Stubblefield has mentioned, with planning for a permanent solution, but also possibly look at eliminating the 4A Development Corporation and substituting it with a municipal development district. You have flexibility, whether it's streets and infrastructure. It can do parks. We have new parkland. You could finance that along with the street. I think it could be a win-win situation if you would just take that under consideration. It would have to go to the voters to be approved, but that's an option that's out there. Our sales tax should continue to grow as the years go by. Right now, each one of those development corporations bring in about $350,000 a year. The temporary solution is about that. But just think about what you could finance with $350,000 a year. Probably what, $4 to $6 million? That could possibly pay for the Redbird improvements, and it could also pay for maybe phase 1 of the new parkland. So I'm here just to tell you to consider some of those options that may be outside the box. I made a commitment to the folks on Shady and Country Lanes to try to push a resolution and a solution, and I'm here just to try to support them. I live off of Penn Lane, and we're getting some drainage improvements there with cleaning the ditches. But, all the folks out there, including myself, we've been paying city taxes for a long time with very few city services. And we like that in one sense. But, now I think it's time to really put that as a priority and make concrete plans to move forward to fund it. So I'm here really to help. Again, I shared my plan with Costello. They're a great firm with drainage. They're experts in their field. So I think, you can definitely trust what they're telling you. But you have to maximize your relationships also with the county and other entities that are out there. So I'm here to help and offer my help if you need it. Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, as you know, this has just been, from council, just charged Costello just to look for emergency access. So this has all come up to. And in doing that, they've actually been able to access some of the costs that it could be for a permanent solution. So we have some of those round figure numbers. So it's a starting point. And this tonight is basically that point. So they can present the different findings that they have on their map. So if you guys take a time to look, present to council, present to them your opinions, like Mr. Former Mayor Kirkendall said, he did present the Costello plan, and they did add that plan to one of their maps. So there are solutions, and we're taking all those in consideration. So I think council understands, we hear exactly what you guys would want for a permanent solution, but this is also a time for us to hear from these drawings what you like and what you don't like. So this kind of gives all of us an understanding of what the options are. And so prior to that, we didn't really know what the options were. And so that's why they were hired to come up with some of these options for these points of access. And from this point, we'll take all these in consideration. I think Mr. Snipes knows that from this point, we'll take what we hear from tonight, and through the period of time that we'll gather y'all's comments and stuff like that, and we'll sit down and have a meeting back with Costello and then also with the county to see what our options are moving forward. But this is for phase one, for us to be able to present something for you guys in case this does happen anytime in the near future, that we have something in plan that helps us get there. As you're well aware, I know, as Mr. Kirkendall said, limited funds for this year for the budget was very tight. We were in a deficit in the last 3 years. So we had to make council had to make a lot of hard decisions on many, many things that we needed moving forward to help us move forward this year. We had to cut. So it's not saying that this is not very important. This is very important for everybody up here, I guarantee it. So, but we wanted to make sure that we could bring something to help you guys, because we've been there. We've been out in the field with you guys when you have to try to access to get to your homes. We don't like that any more than you do. So this was basically, step one for us to try to present something to help, so we don't have to do that. So knowing that, we're gonna move forward, and we're gonna break up from this point.
Okay, is step 2 the permanent solution?
Step 2 would be basically taking all this that we gather and then being able to work with the county, work with Costello, and see what our options are. And then from there, yes, we would always try to work. Like I said, this right here, when you look at it tonight, it might come up and, like Mayor Kirkendall said before, there might be a solution in there that might be a permanent access that we can look forward and say, hey, you know what, this makes a great deal. Everybody liked this plan right here. Maybe in the near future, we can start putting funds or working with the county or whatever we have to do to try to figure out how to make that a permanent road. So
Without eminent domain?
yeah, we don't wanna, it's not always easy,
Yeah,
but
right.
just understand, this is basically step 1, and so, like I said, we appreciate you guys, your input and everything else, but if we can, so for the matter of time, we'll come up from this point, have everybody look at the maps, and feel free to ask us questions while we're around there. It's just-
Can you just answer one more question? Is there a time parameter for the permanent solution?
Like Mr. Snipes said, we don't have an actual crystal ball to tell you what the time parameters is. I think everybody here on council knows it's something of very importance, and so we have, if anybody else, like,
I just wanna ask, all 3 maps are exactly the same?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, they are. They include the 6 alternatives that we've talked about in terms of the access to be used when Redbird's inundated, and then the 7th one is the Redbird one.
CJ, Mayor, before we go look at those maps, while the guys are here, the engineers are here, do we know actually who owns the dam?
It's GCWA, I think, owns
Right.
it. Yeah. That dam is.
Give me a name, I don't know what that is.
Gulf Coast Water Authority. The purpose of that, well, there's 2 purposes of the dam, but they originally put it in a long time ago, so that way when they pump out the Brazos River, otherwise it would, otherwise it would loop back around, so. But that was its original purpose, but it does serve a flood control purpose in keeping water from traveling down Jones Creek. Flooding people down.
I know you guys.
Protects the city.
I'm aware,
There's a
yeah.
farmer.
We got lots of things to control water.
Brazos River Authority.
It seems to me for the city of Fulshear, that if we put some sort of water control into that dam, it's nothing more than a rice field out there, pick it up, let it out, let it go. There is so much acreage in between us and Clear Lake that the whole creek goes through, that there has to be enough to save. I don't care, my kids are the ones that y'all saw pictures of in the boat. It doesn't matter to me, about the road. It's whenever it comes over the top of the hill, it's the problem. And if that dam is higher than the top of our property, that's a nuisance and a liability that we know of.
Well, it's not higher than the top of your property, and that dam is not going to, removing that dam is not gonna decrease the flooding along Redbird.
Well, I know that most of the people in this room was there when the water wasn't going over the top of the dam, and it was sitting on my property.
I mean, it might have been a coincidence, we got
Compared to
relief
your
when it went
house.
over the dam.
Compared to your house slab. That whole area it's a single flat water surface that backs up from the Brazos. And then if you take the dam out, some water will go through, then you got boat arc right there. But the whole problem with that is state law does not allow you to increase flooding on downstream properties without justly compensating those people. Whether
So
it's
you
in
can flood
floods,
upstream, but you
you
can't
can't,
flood
they're
down.
not. That dam
That's
was
what
there,
they've done by
that
building
dam
the
was
dam.
probably there well before y'all's houses were there. That dam has been there, how long has it been? And GCWA's had that.
You know, I must say that a lot of people that are with the city that didn't know there wasn't a water structure to let water out of there either. I mean, we all stood down there trying to figure out what in the world's gonna happen here. So you're saying that if that dam would have blown out when the water was on it, that GWC or whoever it is would come back and put it back in there?
Yes. They would have every legal right to put that back in.
Comment I have is that road was underwater the last year, about 35 to 40 days. I don't have the exact numbers, I have the date somewhere. It was only more than about 3 feet underwater for like 6 or 7 days. I mean, even if we could raise the road 2 or 3 feet, we've got relief for 75 to 80% of the time it's been flooded over the last year. And now it at least helps, so it doesn't have to be, especially if we have emergency access, it doesn't have to be raised 12 feet. I mean, anything would help. And then the other thing is, I've contacted some appraisal consultants, and they believe we can probably get a 25 to 30% discount on our appraisal values because of the flooding, or I mean, basically a month out of 13 months. That would be about $100,000 per year to the county lost in revenue if this isn't fixed over time.
What's the time frame for the emergency road access? When do you have that?
Well, our goal tonight is to have you help us identify what y'all think is the optimal route. What we're gonna ask you to do is take, I think we've got green and blue dots, is that what they are?
Let's use blue for the primary route or your first choice and green for a second.
So Texans blue for your primary favorite and Baylor green, I guess, for your secondary favorite. Put that on there for you, and so we know what your 2 favorite routes are. We're gonna compile that, bring that back to council. They'll identify for staff what that route is, and then we'll sit down with those individual landowners and try and work out a deal to get access through there, and then we'll start paving, or not paving, but putting down material and trying to secure the routes.
We've had 3 floods in the last year, 2 years. April, this year, Memorial Day last year. But we've also had in the past floods between Christmas and New Year's. The road has been underwater that time of the year too. So it's an urgent imperative that you get high behind on the temporary access road.
Exactly. We appreciate it. I'm gonna ask council if we could have an adjournment at this point, and then we'll break off into, move to the maps. We have a motion by Ms. Tristan. We have a second by Ms. Ridge, and the time is 7:25. Take the vote. All those in favor by saying aye. Those opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.